Hi everyone! If you were to ask any fan of racing games to name their favourite titles, there wouldn't be many people who'd not put a Burnout game in their list. With Burnout Revenge turning 20 years old this month, I've gone back to the game to rediscover why it was so good at the time and why it still holds up today. We're going to break things down and look at each element of the game, including cars, tracks, graphics, audio, handling, game modes, game progression, and the gameplay loop of boosting, takedowns and crashbreakers to understand what made it much more than just another typical mid-2000s racer. Before getting into things, if you are new here and if you like racing games, sim racing, F1 or motorsport in general, please do consider a like or subscribe so that you can find my other videos and new content as it comes. It'd really help this little channel to grow. Thank you very much. Of course, this was the fourth game in the Burnout series, with the franchise growing from what was a pretty basic original game to then perfecting the boost mechanics and crash physics in Burnout 2 Point of Impact, to then adding layers of gameplay with takedowns and expanding event types in the third game, to then dialing everything up a notch by simply making every part of the game bigger in almost every way for Revenge. Obviously, there's some evolutions within the gameplay that are divisive in the fan community, and we'll certainly discuss them when we get to them, but as an overall package, this remains one of the strongest titles of its era. I'm genuinely impressed with how fresh the game still feels to play after all of these years. Granted, my reaction times are definitely slower, and I'm not as fast as I used to be, but the enjoyment factor is still just as good as ever. So, a quick bit of history. Developed by Criterion and published by EA in September 2005 on the PS2 and Xbox, the game also had a next-gen upgrade in March 2006 to support the launch of the new Xbox 360 console, which is the version I found the most convenient for capturing footage here. You'll notice the high contrast of the colours and bloom lighting effects, which were not present in the PS2 game, and are a common criticism of this version of the game. But personally, I feel the trade-off for higher definition graphics, widescreen support, additional cosmetic damage on the cars and a few new events makes it worth it. You can still buy the 360 version of Burnout Revenge for Xbox consoles for $9.99 on the Microsoft Store, and it's pretty simple to run the PS2 version via emulation on a PC. The first building block of any driving game is of course the vehicles. Burnout Revenge offered 79 cars in the base game, with an additional 10 in the 360 version. Granted, many of these are reskins, or the same vehicle with different stats, but we've got everything from road cars to supercars, race cars, off-road monsters, and a few randoms to constantly mix things up as you play through the game. Typically, the car stats vary across handling, acceleration, top speed, weight, boost multiplier, and crash breaker strength. You'll want heavy and sturdy cars for road rage events and crash junctions, and lighter, more nimble cars for straight-out racing. Until you reach the upper tiers of game progression, you'll have to choose from cars which tend to only have benefits in one or two of these criteria, but some of the endgame machines excel in all areas, such as the Revenge Racer or the prototype R205 GT. Finding the right vehicle for each event is a challenge in itself, unless you are experienced enough to drive around the weaknesses of a certain car. Ultimately, despite the game repeating the models, you're never short of options within the variety presented to you. When it comes to tracks, this is an area that on paper seems rather weak at first. There's only 8 locations in the game, which doesn't sound like a lot, but half of them feature 2 layouts or reverse options, totaling 13 individual layouts. For an arcade racer, this doesn't sound like much. We're not in the days of single track games like Ridge Racer anymore, but Criterion were very clever in changing elements such as the start-finish lines and traffic density and vehicle types, which then requires you to find different racing lines or risk dangerous shortcuts to stay ahead. Every track features multiple shortcuts, some of which are quick hops to cut a single corner, others are long, narrow, obstacle-laden nightmares that will reward skillful driving if done right, or punish you severely if you mess up. Most locations have a unique feel, from the bright seaside vistas of Sunshine Keys to the gloomy but beautiful Lone Peak Mountains, but it has to be said that some areas do look a bit samey due to the general yellow and brown tone of environments, even if the actual layouts are completely different. Perhaps it's just me looking back with 20 more years of other games to compare it with, or maybe I have too much love for the primary colours of Sega arcade racers, but I do wish some of the locations were a little bit more diverse. There's certainly a difficulty curve built into the track locations as well. Massive jumps within shortcuts add extra challenge in later races, and late game layouts feature some nasty protruding barriers or walls just waiting to catch a wide slide or a lucky strike from an opponent. When it comes to the graphics, Criterion pushed the limits of the consoles of the day hard. At the time, we were seeing driving games constantly setting new standards with games such as Gran Turismo 3, Project Gotham Racing and Forza, all chasing real-time reflections and shadows, but for Burnout it was all about spectacle above all else. A high frame rate was clearly a priority, as if you want your game to be about speed, you don't want it chugging away at 30 frames a second, even in 2005. This led to car models being generally quite boxy and devoid of finer detail, but considering the deformity required of these models, even if the stages of damage were pre-baked rather than truly reflective of impacts, which is pretty much impossible for most games even today with the exception of maybe things like BeamNG, Burnout Revenge improved the overall presentation with a multitude of particle effects, debris, sparks and scratches to sell the explosive nature of the gameplay extremely well. Track environments certainly reused assets all over the place, and while I'm not an expert in these matters, I assume this ensured enough processing power was always available for the driving and crash mechanics at play. We do have to mention the overly saturated style present in the Xbox 360 version of the game. Perhaps it was an overzealous approach with the new effects capable from the new hardware at the time, but this could and possibly should have been dialed back a little bit, as it's fair to say the PS2 version of the game does look a little cleaner and crisper overall. I guess it's a personal preference, but with the extreme bloom effect on this version, it does make it harder to see further into the distance for oncoming cars or tight turns. This is mitigated by experience and familiarity with the track layouts, but for a returning player 20 years later, it was definitely something that took some time to get used to. Lastly, I have to give a quick nod to the explosions, which Burnout did better than pretty much any other game at the time. If it wasn't on fire, it wasn't enough. Over-the-top explosions in driving games are just great fun, and always reminded me of the Die Hard with a Vengeance chapter in the PS1 Die Hard trilogy game. A little shout out there to another one of my favourite action-based retro driving games. The soundtrack in Burnout Revenge is fantastic, if you like your 2000s alternative rock and nu metal, that is. Back in 2005, I played this game on the original Xbox, which had the feature of being able to eat a CD and use it as a custom soundtrack. I had a playlist of hundreds of songs which I'd play alongside this, Tony Hawk's and Rally Sport Challenge, so the original Revenge soundtrack doesn't resonate with me personally, but EA was certainly one of the best at securing licensed music at the time. Having said that, I also enjoyed playing the game with no music at all, as the sound effects are supreme. Engine notes are raspy and angry, and every tyre squeal, scratch and scrape does an effective job providing feedback to your actions. I'm not sure if it's just my own setup, but I find the bass quite heavy too, and this is excellent, especially for crashes and explosions. I can't think of any element of the soundscape that is lacking. Now, I have two potentially hot takes to explain during this video. The first is this, driving without music. One of the best feelings in this game is perfectly nailing a lap or an event without any mistakes. The longer you can maintain your concentration to drive without incident is one of my favourite things about any Burnout game, and it gives you a sort of zen-like state as you find yourself completely in the zone. Achieving this state but with only the sound effects cascading around you and no musical distraction is one of the standout memories I have of playing the game all those years ago. I shall now offer a few seconds demonstration of what I mean, see what you think. Every driving game ever made, from Micro Machines to iRacing, lives and dies on its handling model. The handling in any racing game must fit just right. not too heavy, not too floaty, and accurately convey the speed and inertia of your vehicle. Considering the limited ability of analog inputs on the PS2 or an original Xbox, Burnout games steadily improved throughout the series up to this point. Burnout 1 and 2 cars felt quite heavy, a little slower to respond to turns, but with the arrival of Burnout 3 Takedown and its massive jump in gameplay speed, cars needed to become more nimble and able to change direction with small twitches on the control stick, as well as be held with precision during power slides. I can't possibly fathom how developers are able to do this, but with Takedown and Revenge, they got this balance exactly right. In a game with so much movement put upon you by other elements, such as other cars hitting you, it amazes me how I rarely feel that my mistakes or misjudgments are down to input issues. I know after every crash what I did wrong beforehand, and unless I'm in a really bad mood, never blame the game for my poor efforts. But I say this with a caveat. Balancing handling differences between the different cars means some have very responsive control and others really don't. I can accept slower, bigger cars will feel more sluggish, but there's a few examples where it feels a little broken, and this is particularly apparent with a few of the late game cars such as the Formula car and the GT Racer, which, while ridiculously fast and twitchy, have a tendency to suddenly veer into oversteer, and Burnout is not a game designed to have you facing backwards. It's race ending if this happens, and means I prefer to never actually use the very fastest cars. It's a small gripe though, the majority of vehicles do feel great across all of the events. So, the basic driving mechanics are a proven winner, but where this game really shines is with its gameplay loop of boosting, takedowns and crashbreakers. Boost is earned through various means, such as driving into oncoming traffic, performing jumps, drifts and near misses, and of course taking down opponent cars. Boost can be used whenever you have it, and depletes rapidly, requiring you to continue to take risks and maintain the boost bar for as long as you can, all while driving at an even faster speed. Fail to keep up your skillful driving and you'll lose the speed burst, leaving you at the mercy of the other cars who will always be right on your exhaust thanks to the somewhat exaggerated rubber banding employed to keep the racing competitive. Crashing will cost you boost of course, unless you can take someone out during your crash with the subtle after-touch controls, and this is often a lifesaver in later events. Revenge's boost mechanic is a little different than say Burnout 2, which features Burnout chains, whereby if you boosted continuously and used all of your boost without stopping, it would automatically replenish to full. I loved this mechanic in the older games and I was glad to see it return in 2007's Burnout Dominator, but overall this more time compressed boost in this game serves it better. This constant need to acquire boost is what drives you to race at the limit, taking risks with traffic and shortcuts, and being aggressive with the AI to score takedowns. It's an intensive process and as a result fits shorter races and events well, and is one of the reasons why I'm less a fan of Burnout Paradise, as the necessity for boost is less critical in an open world structure. The takedowns in Burnout Revenge are of course the main showpiece of the game. It's what the brand is known for and they're all just as impressive today as they were in 2005. There is plenty of ways to take down another car. Push someone into a wall or another object, send traffic flying into them, psych them out by following closely, or indeed land on top of them in a glorious vertical takedown. Each track also features 3 specific signature takedown location challenges too for an extra test. We have to remember this game is 20 years old now, and as such, on replaying it for this retrospective, I've reminded myself that sometimes takedowns are not always perfectly balanced. Sometimes you can barely touch another car and they suddenly crash out. Other times you can ram someone at 200 miles an hour with no effect, and the same can apply with the AI performing hits on you too. But overall, the mechanics are reliable and predictable enough to ensure this element of the game remains just as fantastic as it's always been perceived. When I spoke about the game audio earlier, I mentioned I had 2 hot takes on the game. My second hot take is this. I personally feel the game is better with the takedown camera turned off. I know, getting rid of one of the coolest things in the game, those amazing few seconds where time slows, the audio fades and the camera looks back at your carnage before suddenly whipping back to real time, I find the game better without it. It allows me to keep in the zone at maximum speed without the regular interruption of gameplay and keeps my focus dead set on the road ahead. I particularly prefer this in road rage events as it keeps me focused, but let me know what you think on this in the comments. I'm sure I can't be the only one who likes to play this way. Now, let's talk about the game modes. Each Burnout game introduced a new mode over the years, making Revenge rather comprehensive. Standard races are exactly what you expect, but if I could change one thing, I'd like more cars in the race. Only 5 opponents seems rather few these days, but then an arcade racer does still need to have some simplicity about it. AI is aggressive and won't hesitate to put you in the wall, but the rubber banding effect means you can always catch up with a crash-free run to get back on their tails. Later in the game, Crashbreakers can be used as an explosive payback after a crash to take out any nearby cars, keeping you in contention. Revenge also offers short Grand Prix events consisting of a number of races in sequence, but are effectively repeats of previously completed single races. Burning laps and preview time trials are few and far between in Burnout Revenge. Back in Burnout 2, time trials were one of my favourite parts of the game, and it's a shame that these fell by the wayside in favour of more spectacular events. Still, I guess it just feels like that because there's less track locations overall. Getting gold medals on some of these burning lap trials requires a crash-free run using every shortcut and requires some extremely precise driving. The game still tracks your fastest laps across all tracks in the records menus though. Eliminator races are just the same as regular races, albeit with last place being knocked out every 30 seconds. Considering it didn't change the gameplay style, unlike with say Road Rage or Crash Mode, it does feel like unnecessary padding in a game that already has plenty of content. Road Rage returns from Burnout 3, with your mission being to simply destroy a target number of opponents before your car falls apart. The time extension mechanic used in these events is a little pointless, and this is probably the easiest game mode once you unlock some fast heavy cars, which allow you to pretty much plough through cars with an almost automatic takedowns just for touching them. And yes, I suppose it's time we address the elephant in the room, traffic checking. Burnout Revenge's party piece upon release. Until now, hitting same-way traffic caused a collision, as you'd expect. Now, you can drive right on through them, as long as it's not a truck or a bus. The single most divisive element of the Burnout series, I would say. Of course, there's pros and cons to traffic checking. For me, I wasn't a fan of it at first. It took away a lot of the skill required to navigate the races, and made a perfect run all the more satisfying. But with Revenge wanting to be more action-packed overall, it certainly meant that every event would contain maximum destruction, as you'd be dispersing cars all over the place as you boost along the highways. Tracks in Burnout Revenge are narrower than in older games, and I think this helps with the car combat, and if we didn't have traffic checking, the frequency of crashes may have become too frustrating. You can of course just drive against oncoming traffic all the time if you just like the pain, but I think the feature was a necessary evolution to up the ante and match the rest of the game. The traffic attack events are brilliant, requiring precision driving when you're in sparse traffic, using trick shots to destroy larger vehicles to recover precious seconds of time, all while trying not to damage yourself beyond repair. It definitely requires the most strategic driving of any event type in the game. I'd be keen to hear how everyone feels on this subject with the benefit of hindsight, so please feel welcome to let me know your thoughts in the comments. I do try to respond to everyone. Finally, we have Crash Mode, the old favourite, once again dialed up to ridiculous levels of destruction. The basic premise remains simple: find the perfect impact spot to cause the biggest cascade of crashes and explosions. This usually requires a process of trial and error just to find the area to hit first to block the most amount of traffic, and then redoing the event until you have a run where you can after touch your car to the best spot to then use your crash breaker for additional damage. It would feel repetitive to do all of these events in sequence, but thankfully the game structure ensures they don't get boring, plus the Xbox 360 version of the game has 10 extra events to enjoy. There's definitely a bit of luck involved in getting some of the high scores, and some junctions are clearly more thought out than others, but you can't not play this mode without a smile on your face. It's sad that the online multiplayer components of the game are no longer available since EA shut the servers down in 2012. Online play was great fun if you didn't take it too seriously. The game did sometimes determine the incorrect winner and loser in some collisions, but for one of the early online racing experiences, I remember it being perfectly serviceable, and I did miss not being able to play it when returning to the game today. All of these event types are tied together in a well organised world tour structure, comprising of 169 individual events across the 8 locations, 13 tracks and 28 crash junctions. These are split into 11 sets of events, each containing select game modes for each track. By the time you've reached the end, you'll have completed an event in every game mode on every track. Each event awards you with up to 5 points, which unlocks higher tiers and new events. What I really enjoy about this progression system is that it's not just based on your final results, but also on your actual driving style and ability during each event. As well as earning boost, driving skillfully raises your rating on a scale that goes from OK to good to great to awesome, based on your standard of driving. Each level earns you 1 star, or point, at the end of the event. The medal you win then adjusts these points. For example, if you finish the event with an awesome rating but only achieve a bronze medal, you reduce from 4 points down to 3. If you achieve a gold medal, you increase the 4 points to a perfect score of 5. This means you could potentially win a gold medal, but if you haven't driven well enough, you might not yet have the best possible outcome, and this drives repeat play to improve, or retrying races with faster cars once you've unlocked them. Going back to early road rage events with a faster and heavier car is quite cathartic, as you can easily attain better scores with better vehicles. Also worth noting though is that you can't just get yourself a fast car and then go back to win some easy races. The game scales the competition, so if you choose a top tier car, your opponents will be matched in similar machinery to ensure the challenge always remains, and prolongs longevity as you can redo events using different car classes. Having this constant freedom to try new events and game modes in a flexible order helps keep the grind manageable and enjoyable through the game's 169 stages. On top of this, you have an overall driver rank, rising through 20 levels up to elite level, which offers car rewards and yet another reason to maximise your points. In revisiting Burnout Revenge 20 years on from its original release, I found it to have retained all of its charm and character, as well as remain perfectly playable without feeling dated or otherwise devoid of features. Quite often with retro games, you find the lack of quality of life differences in older titles can make them much less enjoyable with the perspective of the modern day, but as a series, Burnout is just as good as it's always been. It's crazy that we haven't had a new entry in this series for so long, and that I still consider this to be one of the very best arcade races ever made. While I still think Burnout 2 is my personal favourite in the series, as I just love the purity of the racing, I can't deny the technical accomplishment here is just as impressive as it was in 2005. There are of course plenty of games which have attempted to take the crown, or copy the Burnout mechanics, but for me, the originals are still the best. Thank you very much for watching if you've made it this far. I'd be really interested to see what people think of the game and Burnout in general, so please feel free to leave a comment. I do try and reply to everyone, and if you'd like to find my other Burnout and racing game videos, perhaps consider subscribing, it would really help me out. In the meantime, perhaps I shall see you on another video. Bye for now.